My Hero Academia, All Grown Up. Chapter 35. Bakugou burst out of the back room of the police station. If you don't have a battle-trained quirk, you need to evacuate immediately. This way, Ida immediately went to work directing the terrified workers of the police station. Please don't panic, but leave behind everything and simply go. This is a serious situation, and we don't have a lot of time. Get the fuck out. Bagwo roared at all the people scattering the room, completely unfazed by their dumbfounded expressions. Don't make me repeat my damn self. Everyone in the room began shuffling in different directions, many of them running through the open door that Ida was holding open with one foot. Bakugou went to work on flipping the desks onto their sides, and he shouted at the police officers that stayed to do the same. If they could set up some strategic cover points, then they wouldn't be entirely caught with their pants down. Once Ida had evacuated all the staff, he hurried back to help the effort of Bakugou and the officers. It felt odd to him that he was turning the tiny police station into a possible battleground. He slid a filing cabinet out of the way before doing a handful of leg stretches. What's the plan? Ida finally felt himself asking as the blonde man angrily kicked a desk chair against the wall. Fuck, Bakugou swore and gave his former classmate a glare over his shoulder. It's not complicated, Four Eyes. We're going to kick their asses. We don't know anything about Teller's quirk. Ida rolled his shoulders and unbuttoned the top of his dress shirt before shedding his blazer. And we're the only heroes here that have any experience with villains of his caliber. Bakugou narrowed his eyes as he began pulling his grenadiers over his forearms. That's not complicated either, dipshit. Radio out to the surrounding agencies for backup. He paused and glanced around the room. Where the fuck did Kirishima go? Ida sighed. He had dinner plans. He left over an hour ago. Why the fuck didn't he say that shit to me? Bakugou bellowed and snatched his phone from his pocket. That son of bitch has some nerve. He won't make it in time. Ida knelt to retie his shoes so that they were snug. This one is on us until backup arrives from your agency. He turned his gaze onto the blonde. We've never teamed up before, so we're going to have to pay attention to each other. I'm taking point. Bakugou's tone left no room for argument. Your support. Got it. Ida felt that familiar wash of irritation that usually came with being around Bakugou. This is a team effort. We can't waste time arguing about petty dash. Listen up, consultant. Bakugou gave him a harsh glare as he spit out the title. Last time I checked, you hadn't made your own arrest in months. You don't patrol, you don't apprehend, and you certainly don't show up for big fights. You're rusty. I'm taking point and you're going to back my ass up or you'll die trying. Got it. Ida frowned and met Bakugou's glare. Is that how you treat Kirishima? Don't change the fucking subject. Bakugou pushed back. Just nod and say yes. Ida felt the urge to curse, but simply stood up. Whatever. I'm going to check on Uraraka. No. Bakugou snapped back rudely. You stay here and I'll check on her. She's my partner on this case anyway. He pushed past Ida, making sure he knocked shoulders with him as he did. You keep watch. I'll be back before any of those villain assholes show their pathetic faces. Bakugou didn't wait for a response, as he tried to soothe his angry nerves. Ida had always rubbed him the wrong way with his in-your-face ordering around and his god-awful superiority complex. However, despite his infuriating personality, Bakugou never failed to look down his nose at the man that had thrown away being a hero for menial consultant work. To the blonde, it was like all 4 years at UA were wasted on him. Once he'd disappeared into the back of the police station, he found Uraraka and the girl still in the same room. He kicked the door open to see that the brunette had released the girl from being chained to the table, but the cuffs on her wrists were still tight. Jeez. Uraraka jerked in surprise at the sudden noise of Bakugou's foot on the door. She turned to give him an annoyed glare. It's never impolite to knock, you know. Bakugou didn't spare her a glance as he settled his scowl on the girl. How the fuck does your dad's quirk work? His quirk. The girl echoed back dumbly. Bakugou paused to take a deep, irate breath. I don't like repeating myself, kid. Uraraka moved to intercede, but Bakugou held up a hand. Don't forget what the mission is, Uravity. Teller is about to serve himself up to us on a silver fucking platter, and I don't intend to waste it. It will get us one step closer to Viper. He strutted further in the room to glare more harshly at the girl. Now tell me, you brat. How the fuck does your dad's quirk work? Bakugou. Uraraka started with a scowl and moved to stand up. Ground zero. Treating her with disrespect is only going to make her more upset. I don't have time for kumbayas and hand-holding, round face. Bakugou turned his glare onto her. You should know more than anyone that respect is earned, and this punk hasn't done anything to earn my respect. As far as I can tell, she burned down a building and was stupid enough to stick around long enough for you to catch her. I won't ask again, kid. It's hard to explain, the girl finally murmured, halting Uraraka's next line of reprimands. It's like a tornado but with paper. I don't really know. He never used it around me much. A tornado with paper? Bakugou replied in disbelief. You're going to have to do better than that. Just don't let him have access to paper. The girl wiped her running nose. He'll cut you to shreds. Fuck. Uraraka watched as Bakugou turned on his heel and marched out of the room, a stoic look on his face. He left the door open on his way out, and she could hear him stomping his way back through the police station before berating some of the officers that stayed behind. Stay here. Uraraka stood up. They're going to need help, and I can't just sit by and do nothing. She looked back down at the girl. Do not go anywhere, okay? We're going to get you out of here, I promise. Uraraka reluctantly signaled for the girl to hold out her handcuffed hands. She carefully redid the lock on the table to keep her in place. Don't worry. Uraraka squeezed the girl's shoulder gently. I'll be back soon. With one last apologetic glance, Uraraka bolted from the room and down the narrow hallway. The last of the employees were evacuating as she pushed her way into the front of the police station. She couldn't keep her eyebrows from rising in surprise at the state of the reception desk and waiting room. Hurry the fuck up! Bakugou shouted from across the room as a handful of young police officers gathered up the papers that had scattered over the ground. Uraraka immediately went to work gathering up any paper she could see, but the sheer number littering the floor proved to be too large a task for all of them to handle. A few minutes passed, and they'd barely made a dent. What are you doing here? Ida fell in by her side, a wad of papers tucked under his arm. Shouldn't you be keeping an eye on our captive? She's safe. Uraraka gave him a weak smile. You guys need help anyway. If this goes south, Ida licked his lips. I think it would be best if you took off with the girl. You can get her somewhere safe. No shit. Bakugou cut in as he stood over them. In fact, she should get going now. No. Uraraka shook her head. More pros will be here soon. I can help hold off any villains until then. That's if they even try at all. Bakugou spat and moved toward the window to stare out at the remnants of dusk. Maybe she's not as important as she made herself out to be. Fucking typical villain right there. That's why I'm staying to help. Uraraka gave him the best smile she could muster despite her fraying nerves. A flash of Constrictor's maniacally grinning face crossed her mind, and she fought off a grimace. This time wouldn't be like the last. It couldn't be. We can handle this together. For old time's sake, right, Ida? Tonight, Ida quirked an eyebrow at her. Call me Ingenium. Ingenium? She smiled back and nodded her head in affirmation. Bakugou scoffed at them. Well, now that you two have had your little moment, we have work to do. Stop fucking around. He began kicking his feet to gather up piles of papers. Those fucksticks could show up at any moment. Do you hear that? Ida suddenly asked and sat back on his heels. Hear what? Uraraka asked dumbly and strained her ears. That. Ida held up a hand to silence the room. What's that noise? Everyone went still and listened for a moment, but Bakugou was the first to pick up on it. A humming that was steadily growing louder. He was hesitant to even call it a hum after a few moments of listening because it was beginning to morph into a shudder. The sound he'd hear when quickly flipping the pages of a magazine or book. It was comparable to the shuffle of money being counted in a machine. Shit. He breathed right as the glass doors to the police station burst, and the entire room erupted into chaos. Glass shards flew in every direction, and they were followed by a whirlwind of paper cutouts. Bakugou grabbed Uraraka and yanked her behind the cover of a toppled desk, and he threw himself behind it with her. Paper cuts were already drawing blood on his left shoulder and cheek, but he squashed the stinging feeling in his mind. Tornado is fucking right. Bakugou spit through clenched teeth as he saw streamlines of paper whipping around the room. He watched as the whirlwind settled into a rhythm, and he found a moment's delay in the attack. He waited until the timing was right before he threw himself up on one knee, positioned his grenadier over the top of the desk, and searched for his target. The second went by too quickly, but he was able to fire off a blind explosion before he was forced back to cover. Shit. He spit out through clenched teeth and felt a sting above his right eye. Uraraka had been bracing herself when she turned to see a steady drip of blood work its way down the side of Bakugou's nose. Bakugou. I'm fine, he snapped at her with a callous look. We need a game plan. All the paper in the air suddenly halted and hovered, almost like they were being restrained from a natural flow. The sound of crunching glass came from the other side of the desk, and Uraraka resisted the urge to look over the edge. What a dump! A bored voice spoke softly as the footsteps came to a halt. Bakugou glanced once at Uraraka before turning his head around to see Ida ducking behind a filing cabinet that was nearly toppled over. Of the three of them, he was the one that had the best vantage point. He jerked his head toward the voice once Ida caught his eye, asking how many villains there were with a simple scowl. Ida carefully angled his face around the back of the cabinet and looked toward the voice. He quickly pulled his head back and held up a single finger. This will be easy then. Bakugou grumbled to himself and suddenly stood up at full height. He turned to the villain at the door and frowned. I'm fucking thrilled that I get to bring your ass in myself. The villain at the door didn't even acknowledge the blonde with a look as he glanced tiredly around the room. Oh, my little Cho. How have you ended up in such a place? Hey! Bakugou barked and pointed at the villain. Eyes on me, asshole. Teller sighed and casually strode over the broken glass as he unbuttoned the cuffs on his dress shirt. If I have to get any blood on my suit, you're going to have to hear about it from your mother. I'm sure that she's tired of cleaning them by now, little Cho. Cho isn't here. Uraraka moved to stand up beside Bakugou, but the blonde tossed her a warning glare that told her to stay put. She pouted at him, but he had already turned away. That's a shame, the villain hummed as he rolled up his sleeves. I'm not in the mood for torture after such a fine dinner, but if it's what has to be done, then I will not hesitate. You're not getting shit from us. Bakugou spit at the man. You're the one who needs to worry about getting tortured here. He examined the villain as he cracked his knuckles and smirked. Fuck, I'll have to be careful not to mix you up with specs. Uraraka's gaze centered on Ida, and almost smiled. It was so like Bakugou to take a dig on both men in the room before a fight. It was like his own way of getting himself hyped up. All you heroes are so boring, Teller hummed dismissively and waved a hand, suddenly releasing all the papers that had stilled to continue their torrential attack. Tell me where Cho is before I get interested. Bakugou threw his hands out on either side of him and released powerful explosions that incinerated the scraps of paper in the air. Ha! Fire beats paper, dipshit. This fight is over. Before any of the heroes could blink, all the paper across the floor seemed to jolt to life, flying up and around in every direction, slicing each of them in every available crevice. Uraraka grit her teeth and hissed as she felt her skin turn to fire under the stinging pain. A thundering boom rattled the building, and Uraraka prioritized shielding herself from the heat over the onslaught of paper cuts that were beginning to draw blood. The desk slid back a few paces, pushing her with it. Once the heat subsided, she peered over the top to see that Bakugou had blasted himself forward, drawing the fire of the paper with him. Ida was hot on his heels. The engines in his legs lit up with blue flames. She quickly went to work on utilizing her quirk and took away the gravity of the desk she was hiding behind. She stood up and watched as Bakugou got close to Teller, attempting to light up the villain's face with an explosion. Die. The villain lazily rolled his eyes and pulled up his hand in a relaxed swing, forcing all the paper in the room to stall for a split second before forcefully being drawn to the area between hero and villain. A massive paper ball formed in the span of a blink and slammed into Bakugou's chest with enough force to make the blonde gag. Bakugou! Uraraka shouted and instinctively tossed the desk in his direction, offering something for him to kick off of to regain his momentum. She didn't wait to see if he took it before she released the desk and repurposed her quirk to gather up filing cabinets as ammunition. Don't forget about me. Ida shouted as he followed up Bakugou's failed attack with one smooth but powerful kick. Just as his shin was going to connect with the villain's shoulder, the paper ball had been released from its tension and loosely wrapped itself around Ida. In the matter of a moment, the speed hero had been wrapped up completely in paper and it was actively restraining him. The fuck? Bakugou spit as his feet smashed into the desk that Uraraka had thrown out for him. She'd released the gravity on it just in time for him to propel himself back off it again. This time, he didn't wait to fire off an explosion. He started firing from a distance, trying to aim for the gathering points that Teller was choosing for the paper clusters. If he could burn away all the ammunition for the villain to use, then the fight would inevitably end. Uraraka skewed her mouth and watched for a moment as the cabinets around her floated. She waited for a prime opportunity before she kicked one with all her strength and sent it whizzing across the room. Bakugou, you have to help Ida. For fuck's sake. Bakugou broke his attention away from the villain for a moment as Uraraka's weapon of choice flew by him and narrowly missed the villain. It smashed into the wall with a crash and crumpled up like a soda can. He wished he could have taken a moment to compliment the power behind her move, but instead focused one blast on their third wheel that was writhing inside a papier-mâché on the ground. Once the paper had burned away, Ida took a gulp of air and nodded thanks toward the blonde hero. Word of advice, do not get caught inside one of those things. Shut the fuck up and get to work, Specs. Bakugou spit at the other man as he redirected his attention toward the villain that was casually meandering around the police station. There's 3 of us and 1 of him. Now isn't the time for rookie mistakes. Uraraka glanced away from her friends to find that Teller was looking directly at her. She grit her teeth and hurled herself behind one of her floating cabinets for cover as a whirlwind of paper twisted its way toward her, working itself into a coned point. She had no way of escaping it, even from behind her cover. Crap. She twisted her body around and forcefully kicked the second cabinet, sending it careening across the room before it burst in front of the villain, sending files of paperwork everywhere. Oh no, she mumbled as she realized that the cabinet had been full of more paper and it fluttered around the grinning villain as it was pulled under his quirk's influence. It twisted in the air like it was resisting him before it settled and succumbed to his will. Viper is the one that gave me my new name, Teller shrugged as he watched Uraraka realize her folly. He found me working in a fairground when I was 14. I was doing a magic paper show for tips that I wouldn't even get to keep. He reached up and swirled a finger, causing paper to gather above it and form into a complex flower. He asked me how much money was in my hat, and I used my quirk to count it quickly. He was very impressed. Shut the fuck up. Bakugou cut in harshly as he raced across the room and held up a grenadier with a maniacal grin. Nobody likes backstories from pieces of shit. It's probably bullshit anyway. He pulled the pin and allowed the grenadier to do its work. Shockingly, the room around them seemed to crack and the ceiling caved in, snuffing out the explosion before it could even touch the villain. Uraraka stared in horror at the new mess. He can control more than just paper? Teller huffed in annoyance. I hate dirtying my hands like this. Look at what you've done to my dress pants. You're nothing more than ignorant children. He dusted his hands on his pants and growled out something incoherent before he returned his now annoyed gaze to Uraraka. As I was saying, Viper saw potential in me and told me to come work for him. He gave me everything, and that included total freedom. When I told him I'd be paying you all a visit tonight, he insisted that I tell you hello. He's quite curious how you managed to escape the effects of his poison, and I'm determined to give him an answer. Aries' smiling face crossed Uraraka's mind, but she wiped it away before it could distract her. Keep dreaming. She moved to squat and power up an ultimate move, but Teller was quicker. The villain lifted his hand and tensed in, the muscles in his arms bracing against an unseen force. The wall beside Uraraka groaned before the drywall ripped away and hurtled toward her, twisting itself into a cocoon that intended to swallow her up. Not so fast. Bakugou's shout came from her right before a scorching heat shuddered the building and the drywall burst into pieces. He rocketed himself across the room, realigning himself in the air and firing off consecutive bursts to buy Uraraka some time. A blue flash zipped along the wall faster than the eye could follow before Ida twisted himself into a kick from behind Teller. Recipro burst. The kick connected and sent Teller face down into the tile floor with a sickening slap. Uraraka flipped herself away from the line of Teller's fire as she watched the villain growl in aggression before he peeled himself off the floor and contorted his arm in front of a bloody smile. We're already bringing out ultimate moves. I have to say, I'm disappointed. I expected more from the heroes that brought down Cameo and Constrictor. Everything with a shred of paper texture in the room pulsed and redirected itself at Ida and Bakugou, while Uraraka seemed to be the forgotten threat. Blood spattered in the air as the two men were sliced up and down by paper of all types. Bakugou! Uraraka shouted and crouched, pressing her fingers into the ground, willing her stomach to allow her the strength her quirk needed to pull off split gravity. A sickness worked its way up her throat and caused her to immediately hurl the contents of her stomach onto the ground. No, she whispered between gagging breaths. Rah! Bakugou's roaring battle cry sent a chill up the brunette's spine. She looked up and found him blowing up the ground beneath him, causing flames to engulf him and the onslaught of Teller's pawns. Once the flames withered, he stood panting, slightly hunched over on his left side. Blood ran down his shoulders and his black trousers were beginning to look tattered. You think you're so fucking powerful, he spit and grinned, but you haven't seen shit yet. You're nothing compared to your boss. He lifted an arm lazily and fired off a lackluster explosion at Ida, disintegrating the paper around the other man. Teller had climbed to his feet and was using the back of his hand to wipe the blood out from under his nose. Viper never mentioned you. He was far more interested in Miss Uravity. He turned his gaze back onto Uraraka, and they lit up in a way that she could only describe as nefarious. Once I get my daughter back, I'm going to flay you until you tell me how you managed to overcome the effects of Viper's poison. When we interrogated your nurse, she didn't seem to have any more of an idea than we did. Uraraka's eyes widened in shock. Her nurse? She remembered the kind woman that had comforted her for weeks in the hospital, and she felt angry tears build up in her eyes. What have you done to her? Tell me where my daughter is. Teller laughed bitterly. She must be here somewhere. None of my colleagues saw her leave this place. Where are you hiding her? Bakugou didn't allow another second to go to waste as he dropped down into a strong pose and held out one of his grenadiers. Do you ever shut your fucking mouth? You're worse than Noodleneck. Once the pin was pulled, Ida and Uraraka knew they only had a split second to find cover from the blast. The heat was so intense that Uraraka felt like her skin could melt right off her face as she shielded herself from it with her arms. She blinked once it was over and waited for the smoke to clear as Bakugou hurled himself forward, clearly not satisfied. The blonde man disappeared into the black smoke before bright explosions erupted from within. After a moment, the blonde reappeared, clearly thrown out of the way as Ida raced into the mess, a determined glint in his eyes. Recipro extend. Uraraka set herself to work on gathering up anything that Teller couldn't manipulate and readying herself for an attack. She glanced at Bakugou and found him looking at her with a conflicted expression. Are you okay? I'm fine, he spit back and his face turned sour. You have to get out of here. Specs, and I can hold him off for the time being. What? Uraraka blinked in shock. No, I'm in this with you. Listen, Bakugou spit back, clearly trying to convey an emotion he didn't know how to. I get it now. I get why Ed Shot has that fucking rule. You're too distracting, especially when you're not at full strength. Just take that little villain and get the fuck out of here. I can't chance Viper getting his fucking hands on you, or her. You have to get somewhere safe. Don't you start that with me. Uraraka felt the angry tears in her eyes become more prevalent. Not you too. I fucking saw you, Uraraka. Bakugou ripped the mask off his face that had been turned into a tattered mess. You can't use your super moves. You're not at full strength yet, and do I really have to say this shit to you right now? Uraraka gaped at him, stunned by his blunt honesty. You guys can't handle this by yourselves. Hurry the fuck up. Bakugou shouted at her, a warning in his eyes not to press the issue any further. I can handle this. Trust me. Ida burst out from the smoke, racing along the walls to gain momentum before disappearing again in pursuit of the villain. Uraraka blinked as she realized that both of them were capable heroes, but in the off chance that Teller got the upper hand, they couldn't risk the girl getting back into the hands of her father. "I'm angry with you." She gave him an intense look as she turned toward the back of the police station. The door was barely hanging onto the hinges, but I'll go. Make sure you live long enough for me to yell at you for this. Whatever round face, Bakugou gave her a bloody smirk before he ripped a broken grenadier off his arm and threw it down. "Now I can go all out." He turned and threw himself back into the fray with a diabolical laugh as Uraraka disappeared down the now dark hallway. The blonde didn't wait to make sure that she had left before he found the object of his aggression guarding himself behind walls within the smoke. He hadn't felt this riled up in a long time, and it helped numb the pain of his injuries. He hated telling Uraraka to get lost in the middle of a fight, but it had to happen. With the way it was going, they wouldn't be able to hold off Teller for much longer anyway, and they needed to secure the one remaining hope they had. Truthfully, he'd had his moment of clarity when he had caught Uraraka trying and failing to use an ultimate move. All in one moment, his anger over Edshot's interoffice dating policy had diminished completely. He noticed that his attention had been torn in the fight. He wasn't able to put maximum effort into combat with the villain because his mind had been partially occupied with worrying about Uraraka. It made him feel like such a coward for sending her away and buying into the same logic that Deku had toward her, but he felt justified. She wasn't on the level she used to be, and while she was fighting alongside him, he would have to hold back to accommodate her. After he dealt with Teller and this shitty day was over, he'd ask her to be his sparring partner. But for now, he'd send her away and buy her the time she needed to do it. "I don't have much more time to waste with you." Teller's voice echoed from behind his barricade of drywall. "Give me back my daughter." Tough shit. Bakugou narrowly avoided one of the drywall chunks that had been directed at him and twisted in the air gracefully. He held up his arm that lacked a grenadier and aimed. "You just missed her." Teller didn't attempt to dodge the explosion, but simply allowed Bakugou to blow through the walls he'd erected around himself. "I know you're full of shit, Ground Zero. I've been watching you lot since Uravity picked up my daughter. So you do know who I am." Bakugou grinned as he skidded to a stop on the tile floor and flipped away from a stream of paper, a few catching across his back and slicing the skin. "Where did little Uravity go?" Teller swiped his loosened hair out of his eyes and licked his bloody lips. As if on instinct, he jerked his body to the side and easily outmaneuvered Ida's next kick. "I'm afraid I don't have much more time, so I'll be on my way to collect her and my daughter now." "Your fight is with me." Bakugou grunted despite the searing pains across his body and held out both palms. Sweat was building on his brow, and it stung the cuts across his forehead. Ida was a powerful ally to have, but his quirk wasn't suited to combat with Teller. He was beginning to become a liability for the blonde. Teller ignored him and pinpointed Bakugou's biggest weakness in Ida. "I'll start with this one." "Fuck," Bakugou grumbled and burst forward, barely managing to bump shoulders with Ida in time for them both to dodge the influx of tattered papers. He gave his counterpart an annoyed glare while Teller took the moment to begin compiling all the remaining paper in the room into an elaborate papier-mâché. Once assembled, Bakugou almost laughed. "You plan to fight me with that?" "Paper can be sharper than steel when reinforced properly." Teller swirled the sword in his hand. "And I'm in luck because I brought a friend with the right kind of quirk." Bakugou jerked his head in the direction of Teller's gaze to find a woman with a sinister smile. She casually strolled into the destroyed station with a relaxed gait before she gently placed a palm against a toppled waiting room chair. Everyone in the room watched as the chair seemed to manipulate under her grip until it had turned completely into cardboard. "Alter," Teller addressed her with an endearing tone. "I was wondering when you would show up. I thought I would spectate for a while." She shrugged as the chair crumbled and fell under the direction of her counterpart's quirk. After seeing this one, she glanced at Bakugou. "I couldn't resist it any longer." "You picked a hell of a day to pick a fight with me." Bakugou tensed and evaluated the situation. "I've got a lot of anger to work out today." "Handsome and a spitfire," she smiled coyly. "You really shouldn't have, Teller. You know how much I adore these types. Consider this a reward for your hard work lately." Teller swung the paper sword a few more times as the cardboard pieces fell into place to reinforce it. "Their backup will arrive any minute. Can you handle them while I search for Cho?" Oh, I suppose. Alter shrugged and rolled her head on her shoulders. Bakugou glanced at Ida with a silent but urgent request. The speed hero met his gaze with determination and nodded. Leave it to me. I'm counting on you, Specs. Bakugou rolled his eyes and turned toward Teller. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Something tells me you won't be winning Father of the Year with your parenting style. You wouldn't understand. Teller swung the sword over his shoulder and turned toward the back of the police station. Nobody ever does until they've had one of their own. Then again, he tossed a sinister glance over his shoulder. I have a feeling that could be on the horizon for you. Isn't that right, Katsuki Bakugou? Bakugou's mouth went dry at the villain's proclamation. His identity being revealed was a first for him, and he hesitated with a response. Kachchako Uraraka hasn't been around to your apartment in a few days. Did something happen? She is quite the looker, isn't she? Viper is quite interested in her miraculous recovery, among other things. What the fuck did you say? White was the only color both hero and villain saw, on either side. The heat of the explosion was enough to soften the metal support beams holding up the building, and the entire place groaned in response. Bakugou didn't care about that, though. He just needed to express himself in the only way he knew how. Howitzer impact. Uraraka could see the pebbles on the ground rattle as she pulled Cho along by the elbow. She had made the decision to leave the cuffs on the girl, but she knew that sooner or later, they'd have to come off. What was that? The girl's voice trembled as a sonic boom echoed through the alleyway behind the police station. Uraraka smiled weakly as she scanned the area. Ground Zero's just going all out. The Edgeshot Agency wasn't too far away, but an unease churned in her stomach. It would be predictable to bring the girl there, and there could be a long line of villains lying in wait along the way. She needed a better option. Her apartment, maybe? Where are we going? The girl asked as Uraraka paused in the shadows just out of the street's view. Uraraka hurriedly shushed her and tried to sort out a plan in her mind. The agency was a no-go, and she was even less interested in taking Cho to a smaller agency. The girl needed to be somewhere safe and untouchable, and there was only one place that came to mind. The answer was truly that simple. Uraraka poked her head out to the street and spied a subway tunnel a block down. They'd have to make a run for it, but if they could get there unnoticed, then they could catch the train out to Mizutofu in the nick of time. It was a worthy gamble. Come on. Uraraka spoke quickly and pulled the girl along as they ran out onto the sidewalk. We have to hurry. Run. Another roaring boom came from behind them, but Uraraka didn't look back. Trust me. The brunette set her mouth into a thin line as she guided the girl, pushing them to run faster. He could handle it. She knew he could. He'd bring in Teller, and they'd move on to Viper tomorrow. It would all be okay soon. I trust you. The words were only a whisper, but she had to say them aloud to put herself at ease as she performed her hero duty. It did little to help her, though. She knew why he'd sent her away. They were losing. So that's it for today. If you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. And if you want to contribute to the entire story being illustrated, just read the information in the description below.